My wife secretly sold our family farm for $750, $0 to fund her affair with my best friend, and now she's threatening to take everything, including the house and my inheritance, if I tell the courts the truth. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. Honestly, I thought I knew my wife, Jessica, better than anyone. We had been married for 10 years, and for most of that time, everything seemed fine. She was the kind of woman who'd throw parties, make everything look perfect, and always had a clever excuse for why she needed extra cash or why she was too busy to spend time with me. But in the last few months, something changed. I started noticing little things, her phone buzzing constantly at odd hours, her being unusually secretive about her whereabouts, and her snapping at me over the tiniest things. It all came crashing down one night when I came home early from work. I didn't have any reason to suspect anything then, just a gut feeling I couldn't shake. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw her car parked in the garage, but the house was eerily quiet. Usually, she'd be waiting at the door, or at least I'd hear the TV or her music. Instead, silence. I crept inside, trying to be quiet, but I could hear muffled voices coming from the bedroom. That's when I froze, because I recognized the voice. It was definitely not mine, and it sure as hell wasn't my kid's. I peeked around the corner and saw her, Jessica, with some guy I didn't recognize. They were tangled up on the bed, her clothes half off, and her face lit up with that fake, flirtatious smile she always used when she was hiding something. I couldn't believe it. My wife, the woman I trusted with everything, was having sex with my best friend, Mark. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or just walk away. Instead, I froze, watching them for what felt like forever. What made it worse was the way she looked at him, so open, so eager, like I wasn't even there. And Mark, the guy I'd known since college who was supposed to be my friend. I'd been blind, completely blind. How long had this been going on? How many lies had I lived through without realizing? I caught a glimpse of her phone on the nightstand, and I saw a string of texts between her and Mark, all flirtatious, all suggestive, talking about sneaking around, about secrets, about meeting up later. That was the moment I knew my world was crumbling. I left quietly, my head pounding, my stomach twisting. I didn't say a word that night. I just packed a bag and left. I didn't want to lose my temper or do something I'd regret, but I knew I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. When I finally sat down the next morning, everything came rushing in. How she'd lied about her meetings, her late nights, her sudden obsession with saving money for some vague reason. Turns out she sold the family farm, our family farm, the one I inherited from my grandfather, to fund her affair. She sold it for $750, $0, and I found out about it only after I discovered the evidence. I confronted her that day, and her reaction was infuriating. She called me paranoid, accused me of snooping, and said I was overreacting. She had the nerve to say she was doing this for us, that she wanted a better life, that I was too controlling. But her words rang hollow, especially when she kept insisting that I had no right to know about her affair or the money she'd taken. She lied through her teeth, claiming she never sold the farm, that I was imagining things, that Mark was just a friend helping her with some business idea. But the bank statements, the sale agreement, they told a different story. She lied about everything, and I felt like I'd been sucker punched. The emotional toll was brutal. I went from disbelief to rage, then sadness, and finally a numb acceptance. I couldn't believe she'd betray me so completely, not just emotionally but financially. The farm was our life, my inheritance, my family's legacy, and she'd sold it without telling me, just to keep her secret. I felt so stupid for trusting her, for thinking we had something real. And Mark, I couldn't even look at him without feeling that deep, burning betrayal. I kept questioning myself. How did I miss all these signs? How could I have been so blind? But I knew I had to decide what to do next. I couldn't stay in this state of shock forever. I needed a plan, a way to get justice, and to protect what was left of my life. After I found out about the farm, everything else started falling apart. It wasn't just the fact that she'd sold our family land, though that alone was enough to make me feel like I'd been punched in the gut. It was the way she spun her lies, the way she tried to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. Jessica was always good at twisting things around, making herself the victim, and turning every conversation into some kind of blame game. She kept insisting that I was paranoid, that I was reading too much into her actions, but I wasn't stupid. I knew the truth now, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I started digging into her phone and bank accounts, trying to piece everything together. That's when I stumbled upon the real extent of her deception. The sale of the farm had gone through a few weeks before I even suspected. I found the official sale documents, signed, notarized, everything. She'd quietly transferred the ownership to some shady real estate agent, and that $750, $0 had gone straight into her account. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer, while I was working late and trying to keep our lives afloat. What made it worse was her reaction when I confronted her again after I'd uncovered the truth. She sat there, all haughty and bitchy, claiming she was doing what was best for us, that I had no right to question her decisions. She said she'd only sold the farm because I was never supportive enough, that I was holding her back. She looked me dead in the eyes and lied outright, saying she hadn't sold the farm at all, that I was making things up because I was jealous of her new plans. I was furious. How could she think I'd buy that? I had the documents, the proof, and she knew it. I started to feel this boiling anger inside. Not just anger at her betrayal, but anger at myself for trusting her so blindly all these years. I kept replaying the moments I missed, the signs I ignored, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she'd always brush me off when I asked where she was. It was like a veil had been lifted and all the lies came flooding out at once. I realized she'd been manipulating me from the start, playing the perfect wife while secretly plotting her escape with Mark. One night I decided I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I sat her down, face to face, and demanded answers. I told her I knew everything, the sale, the affair, her lies. I wanted her to own up, to tell me what she'd done and why. Her reaction was classic Jessica. She started crying, but it wasn't genuine. She accused me of being delusional, said I was crazy for suspecting her. She claimed she'd only been having an affair because I was boring, that Mark was just some guy she met through her business contacts, and that the farm was just a stupid thing I was obsessing over. She insisted she'd never sold the farm, that the documents I found must be forged, that I was trying to ruin her. I couldn't believe her audacity. She was lying so blatantly I almost wanted to laugh. But I knew better. I had the proof, and I was starting to see through her charade. The thing is, I was hurt, more than I expected. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious all at once. How could she do this to me, to us? I started to question everything, our entire marriage, our life together. I was at a crossroads, and I knew I had to decide whether to fight for what was left or walk away. But one thing was clear. This wasn't going to be an easy path, especially knowing she'd threatened me if I dared to tell the courts or anyone else the truth. She made it clear she'd fight me tooth and nail, that she'd take everything. My house, my inheritance, anything she could get her claws into. And I was starting to realize just how dangerous she could be when cornered. That night I stayed awake for hours, going over every detail, every lie, every piece of evidence I had. I couldn't sleep, knowing what she'd done. The betrayal cut deep, and I was left with a bitter taste of anger and helplessness. But I also knew I couldn't let her win, not without a fight. I had to plan my next move carefully, how to protect myself, how to hold onto what was mine, and how to make her pay for what she'd done. It was a mess I never saw coming, and I knew that the road ahead was going to be long and complicated. But I was done being the victim in her game. I was going to take back control, even if it meant confronting her on her own turf, and that's exactly what I was going to do. The more I dug into her lies, the more I realized how deep her deception ran. Jessica wasn't just some woman who had an affair. She'd orchestrated a complete theft of our life together. Selling the farm was just the beginning. She knew that if I ever found out, I'd be furious, and she was right. That's why she kept trying to brush me off, trying to make me question my own sanity. She kept insisting she hadn't sold the farm, that I must be mistaken or that I was overreacting. But I had the documents, the bank statements, the sale agreement, all of it undeniable. I started to feel this gnawing sense of dread. What if she'd already taken everything? I knew she'd threatened to do just that if I ever went to the courts or tried to fight her. She was the kind of person who'd threaten to cut me out, take everything, and leave me with nothing if she thought she could get away with it. It was clear she was prepared to fight dirty, and I had to be ready for that. I couldn't just sit back and let her destroy what was left of my life. So I began to formulate a plan. First, I needed legal advice. I found a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and family law. I told him everything, showed him the documents, and explained Jessica's threats. He advised me to prepare for a long fight, to gather as much evidence as I could, and to be ready to show that she'd fraudulently sold the farm. I also started to get a sense of her financial situation, her bank accounts, her credit cards, and whether she'd been planning this for a while. I didn't trust her, not anymore, and I knew she'd do anything to keep her secrets hidden. Meanwhile, Jessica's attitude was getting worse. She was bitchy, dismissive, and increasingly aggressive. Every time I brought up the sale or her affair, she'd deflect, lie, or attack me. She claimed I was trying to control her, that I was jealous of Mark, and that I was ruining our marriage. But I knew better. I saw through her act now. She was trying to gaslight me, trying to turn me into the villain so she could keep her secrets safe. The more she pushed, the more I realized she was desperate to keep everything hidden: her affair, her theft, her lies. One day, I caught her in a blatant lie. She told me she hadn't seen Mark in weeks, that she'd cut ties with him. But then I found a message on her phone, an exchange of texts between her and Mark, planning to meet up that very weekend. I was furious. I confronted her right then and there. Her face twisted into this nasty sneer, and she snapped at me, trying to dismiss it, saying it was just a business thing, that I was crazy for reading into it. But I had enough. I printed out everything, saved screenshots, and made copies of all the proof I could find. That night I sat her down again, and this time I told her I knew everything. About the farm, the affair, the lies. I told her I was going to fight her in court, that I was going to expose her for what she was. Her reaction was pure venom. She called me paranoid, crazy, and possessive. She told me she'd take everything: our house, my inheritance, the farm, if I dared to go to the courts. She said she'd ruin me if I tried to take her down. That's when I realized she was willing to burn everything down just to keep her secrets safe. I felt like I'd been punched again. The betrayal was overwhelming. I trusted her for so long, and now I saw her for what she really was: a manipulative, selfish woman who'd do anything to get what she wanted. I was angry, yes, but also hurt. Deep down, I felt like I'd lost a part of myself, the part that believed in the marriage, in the vows we took. But I also knew I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to fight for what was mine, for what was left of my dignity. Now, I was starting to understand the full scope of her plan. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. She sold the farm behind my back, using that money to fund her affair with Mark, and she was prepared to fight to keep it all. I had to get ahead of her to protect myself and what little was left. I couldn't just walk away. I had to be strategic, patient, and ruthless if I wanted to win. And I was starting to realize that the only way to do that was to go all in: legal action, evidence gathering, and exposing her lies. The stakes were high, and I knew I was about to enter a war I never wanted to fight. But I wasn't backing down now. Not after everything I'd uncovered. The more I thought about everything she'd done, the angrier I got. Jessica's lies weren't just little fibs anymore. They were a web of deception designed to keep me blind while she took everything I cared about. Selling the farm was just the start. She secretly transferred the ownership, cashed out that $750, $0, and used it to fund her affair with Mark. That money was supposed to be my inheritance, my family's legacy, and she just wiped it out like it was nothing. And all the while she kept pretending she was the victim, claiming I was controlling or paranoid. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let her keep pulling the strings, playing the victim, and threatening to take everything if I dared to fight back. I hired a lawyer, someone who specialized in property fraud and family law. I handed him all the evidence I had: sale documents, bank statements, text messages, and told him everything. His advice was clear. I needed to get a court order to freeze her assets, start the legal process to reverse the sale, and prepare for a long battle. She'd already threatened to fight dirty, and I knew she'd try to hide or destroy evidence if she thought I was closing in. While I was gathering evidence, Jessica's attitude only got worse. She became more aggressive, more bitchy, and more dismissive. Every time I tried to talk about the farm or her affair, she'd blow up, accuse me of ruining her life, or say I was jealous. She kept insisting she'd done everything for us, that I was just too blind to see it. But I wasn't buying her lies anymore. I saw through her manipulations. She was trying to turn me into the villain to make me feel guilty so I wouldn't fight her, but I had enough. I was determined to expose her. One day, I found a new batch of messages between her and Mark. They were planning to meet that weekend, an obvious attempt to hide her ongoing affair. I was furious. I confronted her again and she just sneered at me, claiming I was reading too much into things, that I was crazy for suspecting her. She told me Mark was just some business contact, that I was overreacting. But I had the screenshots, the proof, and I knew she was lying. I started to realize that her threats weren't empty threats. They were part of a strategy to keep me quiet, to keep her secrets hidden. That night, I sat her down and laid everything out. I told her I knew about the sale, the affair, her lies, and I was going to fight her in court. I told her I was going to get back what she stole, that she'd have to answer for her actions. Her reaction was pure venom. She called me crazy, possessive, and said I was trying to ruin her life. She threatened to take everything, our house, my inheritance, the farm, everything she could get her hands on if I went through with it. That's when I realized she'd become dangerous. She was willing to burn it all down just to keep her secrets. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach again. The betrayal cut so deep I almost couldn't breathe. I had trusted her for years, and now I saw her for what she really was, a selfish, manipulative woman willing to do anything to get her way. I was hurt, angry, and overwhelmed. But I also knew I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let her destroy what was left of my life. I had to stay strong, play smart, and fight back with everything I had. I was ready to go to court to expose her lies and to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The road ahead was going to be tough, but I was determined to see it through. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without paying for her betrayal. The legal battle was more exhausting than I expected. Jessica's threats weren't empty. She had hired her own lawyer, and they were both trying to spin the story in their favor. She kept insisting she hadn't sold the farm, that I was crazy or jealous, and that I was just trying to ruin her. Meanwhile, her legal team was doing everything they could to block me, questioning the validity of my evidence, claiming I was overly emotional, and trying to paint her as the victim. It was a constant back and forth, a game of chess where every move seemed to put me further behind. I had to stay vigilant. I worked with my lawyer to gather more proof, bank statements showing the transfer, the sale agreement, the original ownership documents. I also started digging into her finances more deeply, trying to find any other assets she might be hiding or plans she was making. I knew she'd do everything to keep what she thought was hers, and I had to be one step ahead. Every day brought new surprises, another lie uncovered, another attempt by her to manipulate the situation in her favor. Jessica's attitude was relentless. She was bitchy, dismissive, and increasingly aggressive. She would lash out at me during court hearings, calling me paranoid, possessive, and accusing me of trying to control her. She even claimed that I was crazy for suspecting her of selling the farm. But I had the evidence, and I was confident I could prove her lies in court. Still, it was draining. Every day I felt like I was fighting a losing battle, that she was trying to wear me down with her insults and manipulations. One particularly shocking moment came when I discovered she'd been secretly talking to Mark again. I found a new batch of messages, more planning, more secret meetings, despite her claims that she'd cut ties with him. I confronted her during one of our heated arguments and she just smirked, trying to brush it off. She told me Mark was just a business partner, that I was seeing things, that I was crazy. But I had the screenshots and I knew she was lying. That was the moment I realized she was willing to do anything, including lying under oath, to keep her secrets safe. I also learned she'd been making plans to leave the state, trying to hide assets, maybe even trying to start fresh somewhere else. She'd become more paranoid, more defensive, and more manipulative. I started to feel like I was fighting not just for the farm or my inheritance, but for my entire future. I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to be relentless, patient, and strategic. I knew the court process would take time, but I was committed to exposing her lies, fighting for my rights, and making sure she paid for her betrayal. Throughout this entire ordeal, I kept questioning myself, wondering if I was doing the right thing. It hurt to see her so cold, so manipulative. It hurt even more knowing she'd betrayed me with my best friend. But deep down, I also knew I had no choice. I couldn't just let her walk away with everything. My inheritance, our home, the farm's legacy. I had to stand my ground no matter how much she tried to break me down. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, justice, and reclaiming what I'd lost. I was exhausted, but I was also more determined than ever. I wasn't going to let her win. The courtroom battles dragged on for months, each hearing revealing more of Jessica's lies, her manipulations, and how far she was willing to go to keep her secrets hidden. I felt like I was fighting a ghost. Every time I thought I had her cornered, she'd come back swinging with another lie, another excuse, another threat. But I had the evidence now, and I was determined to see justice done. I watched her try to spin her stories, claiming she never sold the farm, that the documents were forged, that I was delusional. Her tone was venomous, her eyes darting around, trying to intimidate everyone in the room. In the end, the truth came out. The court examined the sale documents, the bank transfers, the text messages, and all the proof I'd gathered. Jessica's lies crumbled under the weight of the evidence. She was ordered to give the money back, and the sale of the farm was reversed. I got the farm back, though it was a hollow victory, knowing what she'd done to get it. But more importantly, I managed to expose her for what she really was. A woman willing to betray her vows, her family legacy, and her own integrity just to satisfy her selfish needs. Jessica's threats to take everything, my house, my inheritance, even my reputation, faded into nothing as the judge ruled against her. She tried to appeal, of course, but her attempts were weak, and the evidence against her was irrefutable. As for Mark, he disappeared from our lives after everything came out. I imagine he knew he'd be next if I decided to pursue him legally. I didn't bother. I just wanted to rebuild what I could, to move on from the wreckage she'd left behind. Living through this ordeal changed me. I learned that trust is fragile, that people can hide their true selves behind a mask for a long time, and that sometimes the greatest act of strength is standing up for yourself when everything seems to be falling apart. Jessica's betrayal cut deep, but it also fueled my resolve. I realized I'd been naive, but I also learned to be more cautious, more guarded, and more aware of the signs I'd ignored. Looking back, I see how she tried to manipulate me into submission, how she threatened to destroy everything if I dared to fight back. But I also see my own resilience. I fought for what was right, for my dignity, and for the legacy of my family. And in the end, I won, not just in court, but in reclaiming my life and my self-respect. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that betrayal can come from the people you trust most, but strength comes from standing firm and fighting for what's yours, no matter how dark things get. Trust is fragile, but justice can be even stronger. And sometimes, you have to go through hell to come out the other side with your head held high.